Imagine standing in a courtroom, the weight of a life-or-death decision hanging in the balance, when suddenly, the key witness in a high-profile murder trial disappears without a trace. The clock is ticking, the defense is growing more confident, and the prosecutor is left scrambling to salvage the case. But the witness's vanishing act isn't just a coincidence. It's part of a much darker and more twisted story that no one saw coming. This is where our story begins. In a small town, a brutal murder has shaken the community to its core. The victim? A well-known businessman with a past that could haunt anyone who crossed his path. The case looks open and shut until the key eyewitness, a young woman named Claire, goes missing days before she's supposed to testify. She was the last person to see the victim alive, and her testimony could make or break the entire case. But Claire's sudden disappearance raises more questions than answers, and the stakes are higher than anyone could have predicted. On the defense side, there's the slick and calculating attorney, Victor Hayes, who thrives in the chaos of a courtroom. He's already been working tirelessly to discredit the remaining evidence, casting doubt on every piece of the prosecution's case. But as the trial grows more complicated, Victor realizes that there's something off about Claire's vanishing, something that doesn't add up. His instincts tell him that if he can find out what happened to her, he may just have the key to winning the trial and uncovering a much larger conspiracy. Meanwhile, on the prosecution side, we meet Detective Sarah Collins, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for digging deep into the shadows where no one else dares to look. She's been working tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to the murder, but with Claire gone and the defense playing dirty, she finds herself questioning everything she thought she knew. Every lead brings her closer to a chilling revelation. The missing witness may not just be hiding from the trial, but from something far more dangerous. As the trial progresses and the search for Claire intensifies, Sarah uncovers a trail of corruption and deceit that links the victim to a secret criminal organization operating in the shadows of the legal system. But the more she digs, the more she realizes that the truth she's chasing could destroy more than just the case. It could put her own life in danger. And just as the prosecution seems to be gaining ground, a bombshell drops. A mysterious figure from Claire's past makes an unexpected appearance, threatening to expose everything. Who can Sarah trust? And will the truth ever see the light of day? Or will the dark forces working behind the scenes keep their grip on the case forever? Stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and the secrets about to be uncovered could change everything, if anyone survives long enough to tell the tale. As the trial date approached, the eyes of the nation were fixed on the courtroom. The murder of a well-known philanthropist, Sarah Caldwell, had shocked the city. The prime suspect, a young businessman named Ethan Monroe, stood accused of her brutal killing. His motive was believed to be a business dispute gone horribly wrong, but the only person who could have confirmed his guilt, or his innocence, was the mysterious witness, a woman named Lisa Hart. Lisa had been at the scene the night Sarah was murdered, and her testimony was crucial to the prosecution's case. But now, just days before the trial was set to begin, she had vanished. Detective Rachel Foster, who had been investigating the case from the start, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Lisa wasn't just another witness. She had been found by the police, bleeding and traumatized, wandering the streets the night of the murder. Her account of the events that unfolded in Sarah's penthouse had been detailed, yet vague in certain areas. Rachel knew that Lisa had been hiding something, but what? And why hadn't she come forward now that her testimony could bring justice for Sarah? As the courtroom doors swung open, Ethan Monroe's lawyer, a sharp and experienced defense attorney named David Hughes, wasted no time in taking advantage of the chaos. With no witness to back up the prosecution's case, he was ready to argue that the entire trial was based on a web of lies. He pointed to the lack of physical evidence linking Ethan to the crime and called into question the reliability of the remaining witnesses. With every word, his argument grew stronger, and the judge seemed to grow more skeptical. But Rachel knew better. She had seen the evidence, and she wasn't convinced Ethan was innocent. Meanwhile, prosecutor Jennifer Blake was frantic. She had worked tirelessly to build the case against Ethan, and Lisa's testimony was the final piece of the puzzle. Without her, the case was falling apart. Jennifer began her search for Lisa, reaching out to every contact she had, hoping for a lead. But no one had seen her, and the few people who might know anything were staying silent. A sense of dread crept over Jennifer. What if Lisa wasn't missing by choice? What if she had been silenced by someone who wanted to make sure she never testified? In the quiet of her office, Jennifer reviewed Lisa's last known movements. She had been living in a small apartment just outside the city, an unassuming place for someone who had witnessed a crime of this magnitude. There was nothing to suggest Lisa had been involved in any criminal activity herself, but as Jennifer dug deeper, she uncovered something strange. Lisa had been receiving large sums of money from an unknown account for months before the murder, and those payments had stopped the night Sarah was killed. Could Lisa have been bribed to remain silent? Or was there something even more sinister at play? As Jennifer grappled with these questions, Rachel was looking into a different lead. She had discovered that Ethan Monroe's business empire wasn't as legitimate as it appeared. Beneath the polished surface, there were whispers of illegal dealings, shady connections, and money laundering. Could Lisa's disappearance be connected to Ethan's hidden world? Or was someone else pulling the strings from the shadows, making sure the truth never came to light? As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, one thing became clear. Nothing in this case was as it seemed. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the truth became. But no one could have predicted just how far some would go to ensure that certain secrets remained buried. Lisa had always been a quiet, unassuming woman, someone who blended into the background of life. But when she came forward to testify in the high-profile murder case, she quickly became the focal point of an investigation that would expose far more than anyone had expected. Lisa had seen something the night Sarah Caldwell died, something that could make or break Ethan Monroe's defense. Yet, just days before the trial was set to begin, she vanished without a trace. No one could reach her, not even her closest friends. The police were frantic. The prosecutor, Karen Matthews, was beside herself. Lisa was the only person who could have proven Ethan's guilt, or maybe his innocence. Without her, the entire case hung by a thread. With only circumstantial evidence left, Ethan's defense team, led by the smooth-talking and cunning attorney Henry Griffin, began to make moves to get the charges dropped. They painted a picture of a case falling apart, of an unreliable prosecutor clutching at straws. But Karen refused to back down. She knew Lisa's disappearance wasn't just a random act. It was deliberate. But why? And who was behind it? As Karen dug deeper into Lisa's life, she found something unexpected. Lisa wasn't who she appeared to be. Her past was full of holes, with missing years and inconsistent details. Friends and family who claimed to know her well seemed to know little about her at all. And then there was the strange phone call Lisa had made just days before her disappearance. A call to an anonymous number that the police had been unable to trace. It was as though Lisa had known something was coming, something that would force her to run. But from whom? Or what? Meanwhile, Ethan Monroe, who had maintained his innocence throughout, was growing more desperate. His personal life was falling apart, and the pressure of the trial was taking a toll. His once thriving business was on the brink of bankruptcy, and his reputation in the community was in shambles. If he was guilty, his world was about to collapse. If he was innocent, he feared his life would be ruined regardless. The tension in the courtroom mounted with every passing day. With Lisa gone and the evidence against Ethan barely enough to make a case, both sides were preparing for the worst. But there was a nagging feeling in the air, an unease that something more sinister was at play. Karen began to suspect that someone in the shadows was pulling the strings, someone with the power to make people disappear, someone who would stop at nothing to prevent the truth from coming out. It wasn't just the trial at stake anymore. It was the very foundation of justice. If Karen couldn't find Lisa and bring her back, the case would crumble. But as she worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery, she began to realize that she was walking down a path that might lead her to something far darker than a simple murder trial. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that the people involved in this case, Ethan, Lisa, and even the powerful figures supporting his defense, were all hiding secrets that had nothing to do with the crime at hand. And the truth, it seemed, was more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. But with time running out, Karen had no choice but to continue her search, even if it meant putting everything she had at risk. What would she find when the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place? And who would she be able to trust when the world around her started to crumble? The answers were just out of reach, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. The courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. The jury had been seated, the lawyers had made their opening statements, and everything was set for the trial to begin. But there was one crucial element missing: Lisa. She had been the star witness, the one person who could unravel the truth behind Sarah Caldwell's murder. Without her, the prosecution's case was shaky at best, and the defense smelled blood in the water. Detective Thomas Gray had been assigned to find Lisa. He was no stranger to dangerous cases, but this one felt different. The closer he got to uncovering Lisa's whereabouts, the more questions arose. It wasn't just her disappearance that bothered him. It was the signs that something much darker was at play. Lisa had no family, no close friends, and no ties to anyone who might help her disappear. Yet someone had gone to great lengths to ensure she stayed hidden. Someone powerful. Someone with a vested interest in keeping the truth buried. Gray's investigation led him into a web of secrets that no one had anticipated. In digging deeper, he discovered that Lisa had been more than just a random witness. She had a past, one that intertwined with powerful figures in the city. A past that involved shady dealings, corruption, and a mysterious connection to the very people who might want to silence her. As the trial proceeded without her, Ethan Monroe's defense team began to chip away at the evidence, casting doubt on the remaining testimonies and painting the story in a completely different light. Monroe, who had been cold and composed since the start, seemed more confident than ever. He knew something the rest of them didn't. As his lawyer pushed the jury to focus on the lack of a credible witness, Gray grew more anxious. Was Monroe involved in Lisa's disappearance? Or was she running from something far more dangerous than anyone realized? The courtroom drama reached its peak when a bombshell was dropped during the cross-examination of one of the remaining witnesses, a former employee of Sarah Caldwell's charity, who had claimed to have seen Ethan Monroe leave the scene the night of the murder. The defense tore into the credibility of the witness, suggesting a motive to lie. But it was the final question that sent chills through the room. Is it possible, Mr. Williams, that you were actually paid to lie in order to cover up a much larger conspiracy? The entire courtroom froze, the air thick with tension. Eyes turned to the prosecution, but Gray wasn't there. He had slipped out of the room moments before, following an urgent lead that had come in just as the trial was in full swing. Something told him this was the moment everything was going to explode. As Gray made his way to the address he had uncovered, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, a single line of text that made his heart race. "She's not the only one missing." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog as the door to the abandoned building creaked open in front of him. Gray knew he was about to uncover something far worse than he had ever imagined. But the truth was still just out of reach, and with every step he took, the danger grew closer. Back in the courtroom, Ethan Monroe's eyes locked with the prosecutors for the briefest moment. Was it guilt, or was it something far more sinister? The room held its breath, and the clock ticked down to what would surely be a game-changing moment in the case. Detective Thomas Gray, the seasoned investigator on the case, had been tirelessly searching for any trace of Lisa. Her disappearance didn't feel random. Something about it was off. He had been in the trenches too long to dismiss it as a coincidence. And then, just as the trial was about to begin, Gray uncovered something shocking. Lisa had left behind a single, cryptic message, scrawled in a journal hidden in her apartment. The words were barely legible, but they were clear enough to raise alarm. "The truth is worse than they know." Gray's heart pounded as he stared at the message, realizing that Lisa hadn't simply run away. She had been forced into hiding or worse, silenced. His gut told him that the stakes had just been raised exponentially. Whoever was pulling the strings didn't want the truth to come out. Someone had orchestrated Lisa's disappearance. But who? And why? As the investigation deepened, another shocking discovery was made. Lisa's journal contained references to a man named Marcus Dell, a name Gray hadn't heard before in connection with the case. Marcus was a shadowy figure, one with ties to both the criminal underworld and corporate circles, a man who seemed to operate just out of reach of the law. Was he connected to the murder? Or was he trying to manipulate the case for his own purposes? Meanwhile, in the courtroom, the trial was barreling forward. Without Lisa, the prosecution was struggling to present its case, and the defense team, led by the confident and charming attorney Victor Stone, was making every effort to plant doubt in the jury's mind. Ethan Monroe's demeanor remained cold and detached, as though he knew something everyone else didn't. His calm, collected nature was beginning to unnerve even the most experienced lawyers in the room. Was he guilty, or was he the victim of an elaborate frame-up? The tension between the defense and prosecution was palpable, each side trying to outmaneuver the other at every turn. But behind the scenes, Gray was racing against time to find Lisa and uncover the truth. Every lead seemed to circle back to Marcus Dell. Gray was starting to believe that the key to solving both Lisa's disappearance and the murder of Sarah Caldwell might lie in that one man's secrets. Then, just as Gray was about to confront Marcus, a break in the case came from an unexpected source. A letter delivered to the police station, postmarked from a small, remote town miles away from the city. The letter was from Lisa. It was short and to the point. "I'm safe, but they know I'm close to the truth. Ethan Monroe isn't who you think he is. Find Marcus Dell before it's too late." Gray's blood ran cold. If Lisa was right, then everything they thought they knew about the case was a lie. The walls were closing in, and the truth seemed more elusive than ever. As the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, one thing became terrifyingly clear. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. Gray's heart raced as he read the message in Lisa's journal. It was a single line of text, hurriedly written, but it was enough to change everything. "The truth is buried deeper than you think." The word sent chills down his spine, but it was the next line that made his blood run cold. Ethan isn't the killer, but he's connected to it all. Find the money. With that haunting message in mind, Gray knew he had to act fast. He rushed to the courthouse, hoping to intercept Ethan Monroe before the trial continued. As he pushed through the doors, he spotted Ethan standing near the defense table, looking confident and calm. Too calm, considering the severity of the charges against him. But it was then that Gray noticed something that sent a wave of panic through him. Ethan's lawyer, a slick, silver-tongued man named Richard Dale, was whispering in his ear with an air of familiarity, too comfortable for a simple attorney-client relationship. Gray's instincts kicked in. He needed to get to Ethan, to confront him, but something told him the truth wasn't as simple as it seemed. As he approached, the courtroom doors suddenly slammed shut behind him, locking with a resounding click. The lights flickered, casting a strange shadow over the room. The tension in the air became palpable, and Gray realized that this was no longer just about a murder trial. This was about a conspiracy, one that reached far deeper than he had ever imagined. The prosecutor, Sarah Caldwell's former colleague, stood up and motioned for the judge to pause the proceedings. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's been a serious breach. Evidence has just come to light that could change everything." Suddenly, the room was plunged into chaos. The defense team shouted objections, the judge called for order, but no one could deny what Gray was holding in his hand. A file, a collection of bank records that linked Ethan Monroe not to Sarah's murder, but to a series of illegal financial transactions tied to a shell company used to launder money. And the company? It was owned by none other than Richard Dale, the defense attorney who had been acting suspiciously all along. Just as the courtroom erupted into disbelief, there was a movement in the back. The doors swung open, and a woman stepped into the room. Lisa. She was alive, and she wasn't alone. Lisa had been hiding in plain sight, carefully orchestrating her own disappearance to protect herself from the criminal syndicate she had accidentally stumbled upon. Her cryptic message wasn't a warning to the prosecutor or to Gray. It was a plea for help. Lisa had been blackmailed, forced into silence. But now, with the pieces falling into place, she knew the time had come to reveal the full story. Richard Dale didn't just represent Ethan Monroe, Lisa said. her voice strong but shaky. "He's been running the entire operation. He's the one behind Sarah Caldwell's murder, and a dozen others. He used Ethan as a pawn, but he never thought we'd get this far." The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the weight of her words settled in. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. Ethan Monroe, innocent of the murder, had been manipulated by a much larger force. But now the true criminals were finally exposed. Just when it seemed like justice had been served, there was one last shock. As the police moved in to arrest Richard Dale, the man turned to face them with a cold smile. "You think this is over?" he sneered. "You've only uncovered the surface." Before anyone could react, the lights went out entirely. The last thing Gray saw was the shadow of a man slipping through the courtroom door and vanishing into the dark. Gray knew there was more to the case than anyone had realized. Ethan Monroe might not be the murderer, but his ties to the crime were now undeniable. He followed the trail Lisa had left, and what he uncovered was far darker than anyone could have imagined. The money Lisa had referred to wasn't just a simple transaction. It was a hidden network of shady financial deals, funneling millions through a series of shell companies. But it wasn't just Ethan who had been involved. The murder was a warning, and the true culprit had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Gray's investigation led him to a shocking discovery. Sarah Caldwell had been on the verge of exposing a massive financial scandal that would have ruined some of the city's most powerful figures. Ethan Monroe's business dealings were just the surface. Beneath it all was a dangerous cabal of elites who had been hiding illegal transactions for years. Sarah had gotten too close, and when she threatened to reveal the truth, someone decided she had to be silenced. As the pieces fell into place, Gray's next move was clear. He couldn't expose the entire conspiracy without risking his own life, but he knew the public needed to know the truth. With the help of a few trusted allies, he orchestrated a covert operation, gathering enough evidence to bring down the powerful figures behind the conspiracy, including the person who had ordered Sarah's murder. It wasn't until the final day of the trial that the bombshell dropped. Just as Ethan Monroe prepared to take the stand, Gray presented irrefutable evidence showing that Sarah's murder was part of a much larger plot. The key players in the conspiracy had been using Monroe as a pawn, manipulating him into believing he was the center of the scandal. But it was the shadowy figures pulling the strings who had orchestrated Sarah's death to keep their secrets buried. The courtroom fell silent as the truth unfolded. The jury gasped, and the defense attorney scrambled to contain the chaos. But it was too late. Ethan Monroe was exonerated, and the real criminals were finally exposed. The city was shaken to its core as the investigation spread to the highest echelons of power. The once silenced victims of the financial network began to speak out, and the corrupt empire that had thrived in the shadows started to crumble. But just as things seemed to settle, there was one final twist. Gray received an anonymous tip that pointed to Lisa's involvement in the conspiracy, revealing she had been a part of the very web of corruption she tried to expose. Had she been working with the criminals all along, or had she been a victim of the same dangerous game? The answer was still unclear, and as the story came to a close, Gray was left to ponder whether anyone could ever truly be trusted in a world where the truth was so easily manipulated. The case was closed, but the lingering question remained. In a world where justice is often a game of power, how many people are willing to sacrifice everything to reveal the truth? The answer, as Gray knew all too well, was still uncertain, because in the end, the truth is never as clear-cut as it seems.